All right, hello and welcome back to another Direct Strike video. Well, this is not going to be your typical Direct Strike video. I'm actually going to be reviewing the Commander tier list for this week's Brawl. So let's get into it. So the aura for this week, we have two really familiar auras: Stockpile, where you start with bonus money, and Discharge, where there are no shields on any of your buildings. So that means rushing is going to be much more powerful. However, the middle one, Synergy, is a very unique aura that, personally, I have never seen before. So Synergy makes it so that everyone on your team spawns their units at the same time. Your units cost twice as much, so you're going to be pumping them out much slower, but it's going to cost you if you have a teammate that just sits and does nothing and doesn't play anything. All right, so this is a very interesting brawl. So let's just get into the tier list that I have assembled right now. All right, so I'm going to talk about all of this real quick. So I think Vorazun is probably going to be one of the best commanders, simply because of Corsairs, Disruption Web, and Oracle Stasis Ward. If you play her correctly, your Corsairs are going to disrupt the entire enemy wave, and it's going to force them to have to place their units staggered in a staggered formation, or else like none of them can shoot, and then your allies can just blow them up because they're not doing anything. Next, I have Kerrigan. So Kerrigan has a lot of value that she can bring to the team in forms of just having lots of Ultralisks, in forms of being able to generate extra money, which is very important for this brawl. Her disruption wave is also very powerful. However, she is kind of vulnerable to AoE with units like her Mutalisk and her Hydralisk that will absolutely get shredded by heroes with AoE, but they do lots of damage. So if she can have someone to tank for her, she will absolutely rip through a wave. Next commander we have is Alarak. So Alarak is actually, it might actually be more hilarious if you have Alarak every single wave. But Alarak is just very tanky. If you keep feeding him supplicants, he can be the tank for your team's wave, as well as many of his supporting units are decent. Like Vanguards can be pretty good against armored units, but keep in mind that they will be twice as expensive. But Alarak is really good in terms of his like early tier 1 push. He might just be able to sit tier 1 for the whole game and just feed himself supplicants and tank for his team. And speaking of tanking for your team, you have Dehaka. Dehaka is already a really fearsome commander in the normal game mode where he just spawns in. He has like 3,000 HP in the late game, but now he spawns every single wave. He also has some decent support units, but I believe Swarm Hosts have been disabled for this brawl, so you can't really stack them, or else that would be like a one-way ticket to winning or losing. Because if you just stacked a lot of Swarm Hosts, your opponent could never beat them, and then be just game over. Whoever stacked more Swarm Hosts would win. But Dehaka's up here because he has a lot of utility to offer, in just the form of his hero. And he can also build Ultralisks that are also much cheaper, so he can just be like a primary tank. So next up, we have Raynor. I think Raynor just does pretty well overall. So he can keep control of the air by building like just pure Vikings. He can also keep control of the ground by building pure Marauders. Unfortunately, Raynor does not have access to siege tanks. It's probably because his siege tanks are probably too good, because they're also a stacking siege unit. He can also build the Hyperion. It's a hefty sum of 4,500, but a Hyperion every single wave is pretty fucking tough to deal with. Next, we have Tanis. So Tanis, none of his units are really altogether that powerful, but he's a great supporting commander to have. He does a lot of AoE damage with his High Archons, his High Templars, his Scarabs, and so he can fulfill the role of clearing up a lot of the smaller units on the enemy team. So while his AoE units are going to be twice the cost, they're also going to be like 2 or 3 times as effective. He's also really good with his Immortals, because they're just good health tanks. So if they encounter any armored units, it will definitely help with your wave. And next we have Sagara in the A tier at the bottom. So Sagara it's only down here, not higher up, because her units are going to cost a lot more. But I believe she still gets those free banelings, and her wave is already like very, very scary to deal with. They're just gonna blow up entire waves by herself. So having a bit of Sagara in every single wave is definitely going to really help your team push forward. Considering there's not too many stacking units anyways. Sagara just doesn't have any to begin with, so it's fine. Aberrations offer quite a lot of utility. And the fact that with the protective covering, they can protect allied units, and they're just all-around decent attacker. And when they die, they have the utility of spawning 2 banelings that will also spawn 2 more banelings. So they're just raw damage on the ground. And with Sagara's Scourge, they'll clear the air as well. That's why I have her placed here. And then so next on the B tier list, I think Tychus is here. So Tychus's units are twice as expensive, so now they all cost 1,300, which is why he's not any higher up. But Tychus's units, as you know, are very powerful and have very powerful effects. For example, Nux would be very good on big waves. Nikara is actually very good as a supporting unit. Normally you don't build Nikara because she doesn't do anything, but when you drop the restorative burst on your entire team, it can heal your entire team through AoE, like through AoE of like Tanis, through AoE of all these other heroes. Like it'll keep your team alive. But other than that, I think Tychus is probably just like Tychus himself is decent, you know. But Tychus can probably go tanky and frontline very well because Blaze is super tanky. Boswell is super tanky. Yeah. Next, I have Stukov. So I have Stukov here. Not really much higher, because while Stukov's units are still very cheap, right? Infested civilians will only just cost 40. They will die horribly to AoE, and once that starts piling in, he's not going to do that great. His only other options are like the bunkers, Diamondbacks maybe. I don't even know if he has access to siege tanks, but based on this, actually no, he probably might, because Stukov's siege tanks cost a lot. They cost 900 now, which means it's kind of hard to mass them without just losing straight up. And his Apocalypse is going to cost like 2k, so it's going to be really rare that you're going to see that come out. But if it does come out, it's going to be pretty strong. But Stukov is pretty good in terms of swarming early, so he can definitely like help meat shield for your team. And his queens may be good. Actually, you know what? They probably aren't, because there's too many targets to hit unless you take them off autocast and micro. Next, we have Nova. So Nova's here simply because her units cost quite a lot, and they usually are better against like solo waves that she specializes against. So you try to counter your opponent when you play Nova, because her units do a lot and they do very well against certain types of units. So it's kind of hard to counter like 3 waves at the same time. But Nova herself is a good unit, and Nova does have access to the coveted siege tank. And now Nova siege tanks obviously are really good, so she can be a backline support, and maybe offer some assistance in the terms of Hellbat Rangers. I've seen a Nova go hollow decoys, but I feel like those are very expensive, so they probably aren't worth it. But definitely Hellbat Rangers, even just Nova Marines to add some DPS at the front. Okay, so next on the line we have Abathur. So Abathur's down here, not any higher. You'd think like because of his Vipers, he'd be probably upward for Azunas. But I think all Abathur really has are his Vipers. And they cost 440, so they're very expensive. Because they got rid of his Swarm Host. So that's rough. He can't. That's like one of his best ground stacking units, and all his air units are very expensive. Like a Devour costs twice as much. So it's going to cost around like 600. A Guardian is going to cost around like 470. It's going to cost 470. Yeah, and so what makes Abathur air good? It becomes really expensive. His Mutalisks aren't really that great because they'll just explode to AoE, and there's going to be AoE in this brawl, especially with all these commanders jumbled up in there. So a Mutalisk cheese is suddenly just not as effective anymore. So yeah, Abathur doesn't really have anything too great on the ground either. Like they're just sort of average units. You don't really want to be going Brutalisk. It's just like a glorified version of the Ultralisk. It's not really that great either. So yeah, Abathur's not really that good. Maybe the Vipers will be good, like just pure Viper Abathur. But then you have nothing on the ground. Okay, so to our C tier heroes, we have Phoenix. So Phoenix is down here because most of his units are very expensive, and leveling a hero is going to be twice as much money as it used to be. So Phoenix was already kind of like average. But the reason why he's not lowered down is because he actually makes a great frontline hero. So you just build a bunch of Legionnaires for your team, and they'll just tank pretty well. And Phoenix Colossi are actually decent at being backline anti-ground support, but he's going to have to rely on teammates to back him up in the air. So he could be higher up if he's supported by someone like Raynor or someone like Stukov going Liberators, because it makes up for the flaws of his very weak Air Force. But other than that, Phoenix is sort of just not the best right now, because his units are already very expensive, and now there's twice as expensive. And next on the list, I have Horner, which some of you might find strange, but it's mostly because Horner's like coveted Wraiths and Deimos Vikings are, well, now they're twice as expensive, and the Wraiths are really, you sort of want to get out Astheria Wraiths as like a cheese to just surprise your opponent, but now you can't get them out as early, you can't get them out as effectively. That being said, though, if your opponent really has no good anti-air, Horner could still dominate, but because there's going to be 3 times the amount of air, I don't know if Horner can do that well. If Horner just goes straight Deimos Vikings, that might be okay, but Deimos Vikings cost a lot, 720, right? You're going to have, I mean, I guess like the ratio is still going to be kind of the same, but your ground forces, like your tier 1 ground forces, are sort of, they're sort of really substandard. I mean, maybe the Reaper's okay, the Hellion might be okay, but because they're all spawning together, they're just going to die. I think the Hellion Tar Bombs would definitely be very useful on ground units. So really more of a supporting role than a high DPS role. And then next we have Carex. So Carex is sort of, I think I would place him maybe as around the same equivalency for, like, in terms of like for Phoenix, because his Sentinels are just great meat shields because they die and then they revive. But then he doesn't really have too many options in terms of what to build. Annihilators just aren't going to be good with the Shadow Cannon because it's just going to kill whatever's in front, and whatever's in front is probably going to be like a bunch of Zealots or Fire Bats or Hellbats. So that's not going to really have the effect you want it to have. So the Annihilators are going to be average, and they're also like the most expensive Immortal. As well, Carex doesn't really have access to any AoE, which makes it really tough for him in this brawl. Like, the only thing he has is like that laser, and I mean that laser is like useful every 8 minutes, so it's like it's all right if you go for like a power push, but he doesn't really have too much to offer. Like, he can offer carriers, but then carriers aren't really that great of a DPS unit, and Carex's Colossi are much more expensive than Phoenix's. While they do set the ground on fire, you can probably get like 1 more Phoenix Colossus for every like 2 Carex Colossi. So he's just down here. Maybe, you know, some gameplay will change that understanding. And then next on the D tier, I have Swan. So Swan has the potential to be good against bio commanders because he can just mass science vessels. But most of his really good units cost a lot or have been disabled. So I don't think Swan has siege tanks either. And his Thors are now twice as expensive. Now, Thors are, you know, they're pretty good because they disable the whole wave with their stun cannons. But there's only one of them. And you're up against an entire wave, right? Say like you get your first Thor out, right? I think Swan might start getting good as you have more Thors. But he's definitely not going to have the DPS to take out heroes like Alarak or Dehaka, who will be spawning every wave. He's definitely not going to be able to handle the Corsair's Disruption Web from Borazun. And he doesn't really have too much to offer besides that. Like, he could just face tank with Hellbats. But, you know, there's other tank heroes that I guess do a better job at that. Okay, and then finally we have Stetman. So Stetman is here because other than like a Baneling strategy, it doesn't seem like he really has anything going for him because his Hydralisks are quite squishy and now they cost twice as much, right? He can be DPS, but then you might as well play Kerrigan at that point if you want the Hydras for DPS. His Ultralisk will cost 900, because they're the most expensive ultras. Normally cost 450. So he's not gonna have access to like any good tanky units. Like he'll have Zerglings, right? But the problem with Stepman Zerglings is that they also cost 100 now because they're the most expensive Zergling. So he doesn't really do that great of a job of tanking either. Yes, the Zerglings have like the hardened shield, but they're just gonna die to the front line much faster than someone like Alarak or Dehaka is going to die. So that's why I have Stepman down here. He doesn't really have any good options for this Brawl, I think, besides like just supporting with maybe Banelings. Yeah, but I think that's what the Brawl is going to be set up for this week. It's going to be a very interesting Brawl, actually. I think Synergy is like a great Brawl idea. It keeps the games really long or very short if you just don't know what you're doing, and it definitely helps spice things up. However, it would really suck if like one of your teammates just aren't here. And I'm actually kind of curious, like what would happen if one person on your team left and there's just 2 people left? Because I know that if there's 1 person left, you just spawn 3 times as many units. But if there's 2 people, I wonder how that works. But anyways, that's it for this video. So I will see you guys next time.